Hey, all right. We now have our second candidate in the waiting room, so I will let Clayton Cheever in to begin our second interview for the Morrill Library Director, or the Director of the Morrill Library. All right. Clayton, you with us?
I am here. Good morning.
Excellent. Good morning. Great to see you.
Nice to see you.
All
How are
right.
things going?
Very well. Very well. Thank you. I will pass it over to John Hall and let him begin the introductions of the trustees, and then we'll get into our questions.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Good morning, Clayton.
Good morning.
I'm John Hall. I'm the current chair of the Board of Library Trustees. I'll ask Donna, who's next on my screen, to say hello.
Hi, I'm Donna Montgomery, one of the trustees.
Pleasure to meet you.
And George.
Hi, I'm George Michalik, another one of the trustees.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Marguerite.
Hi, Clayton. Nice to see you again.
Yes, likewise.
And lastly, Sarah Beck.
Clayton, I'm Sarah. We had met in the previous interview.
Yes, it's great to see you again as well. Thanks for joining me and for participating in this process.
All right. Well, Clayton, we'll again thank you for coming, virtually here today to meet with us. And let's just start off with the fact that the screening committee was impressed with your resume, impressed with your interview, and has moved you on to this stage of the process. And the trustees are anxious to get to know a little bit more about you and your experiences. So I have a number of questions that I'm going to be throwing out, and topics, and the trustees will be jumping in with their own questions in response to some of your answers. We see this more as a dialogue. So let's start with just, who are you? And why are you here? Why Norwood? And how does this all fit into the grand plan of your library career?
The grand plan of serendipitous exploration, right? Well, I'll give you the condensed version because we don't have forever, but I feel like I've been preparing for this opportunity for my life. The life is a preparation as you live it. I have been passionate about public libraries for, when I go back and look, it's been almost 20 years now that I've been in public libraries, but I had a career before this. So I went to undergraduate school and studied geography because I was really interested in how communities work together and interact with each other across physical spaces. And I, enjoyed back in the day doing things and, learning how to make maps by hand and how to look at, one of my favorite books at the time was How to Lie with Maps. Because every map is a lie, right? We had to choose what information we're sharing, just like I'm choosing what to share with you right now. And it's, how do we put our best case forward? How do we, represent what we want people to know? I went from college and did activism work and was working I immediately was in Texas and then in Colorado for a spell, and doing a combination activism work and developing tech skills. Ended up working in Colorado, serving on a nonprofit board, working in a cooperative bookstore, and working, paying the bills, working for a startup biotech company that was researching heart muscle, congestive heart failure, and it specifically one a novel drug that they had purchased. And I was the first job was to build a database and understand even what relational databases are all about, and then work with the head of the cardiology department at the University of Colorado, Denver, who was the chief science officer, to build and understand what they purchased. And then the company expanded while I was there. I moved to Massachusetts after my son was born. My wife, we moved out here so she could pursue a doctorate in education. And I was trying to figure out the next best step in my life. And it was at that point that I kind of was reintroduced to public libraries. I had enjoyed them growing up, certainly. But like many people, stepped away, during college and had found other pursuits and passions. But was always engaged in reading, had been working in the cooperative bookstore and had even thought about that as a profession. It was just a place I liked to be. Love surrounding myself with books, with music, with movies, and having conversations about these things. And I love bringing people together. When I thought about those passions, when I thought about how I really care about making sure that information is structured in a way to make it as easily accessible for the people that want to access it. And I realized the vital role that public libraries play in communities all across the country. It was a natural step through a series of conversations to realize that I needed to go to library school and pursue a master's in library science. I did that. Upon graduating, I went to Watertown, where I had been working. I was living. That was the first place I landed in Massachusetts, and was talking and had a great early conversation with the assistant director there. And then I was the head of tech services and IT there for a few years. Then I wanted an opportunity to work in Boston in a larger system and to increase, continue developing my skills. I spent a few years as a teen librarian, which was fabulous. I love working with teens, and there's just something about always questioning that, is part of the growing experience that I really enjoyed. And then I joined the management team in Boston because I had tech skills that I'd used in Watertown and developed over time. And so the first job that contribution I made in Boston was to roll out a new time and print management system across the entire city. Then I returned to doing some being a teen librarian until position opened, and I became the Metro Boston Library Network administrator and a project manager working on improving the digital literacy for the entire city of Boston across all Boston Public Library locations, and in partnership with Boston Centers for Youth and Families and the Boston Housing Authority. It was a really cooperative enterprise. It was grant funded. I was also responsible for the E-rate funding, which is a complicated federal piece where you can get some funds if you're income eligible. So I managed that for the city of Boston and was really happy. There's a really great team of people working there. It's been evolving. I worked directly with David Leonard, who has since become the president of the Boston Public Library, and just really enjoyed the refreshing. There was just there was an energy when I was a part of that team that was really great to be a part of, and I wasn't looking to leave when the opportunity here in Quincy, where I'm sitting today, opened up. But the opportunity to join a management team that could be more nimble presented itself here in Quincy. We have I was one of a team of about 30 managers in Boston. I came here to both help run the show with Megan, the director, and to be supervising a group of management team of about 9 people. There were 7 other people, Megan and myself. So we can move a lot more rapidly and be more responsive to the community, which was exciting. And it was an opportunity here in a gorgeous place with a really exciting community that I'm still enjoying. It's a great place to be. And if you want to talk about Quincy all day, we could do that, but that's not the point of our conversation today. We want to talk about Norwood. So why am I here talking to you about Norwood? I'm not looking to leave Quincy, but Norwood's an awesome opportunity. And I was really excited when this came up, when I learned that Charlotte was retiring. I first called Lydia, the assistant director, to find out if she was applying and to get the inside scoop. And I've known Lydia for some time through some professional organizations. I've also, I went to school actually with Kate, the children's librarian. I worked with Brian, who's in the IT. He actually worked for us here in Quincy when I was here. I was here when I started, and he and I have won national awards. Like I talked about in my first interview. I actually have a plaque from an award that Brian and I won still hanging on my wall here, which I'm super proud of because it's really nice to get that recognition for the work that we did. I've known Liz from professional conferences as well. Norwood has quite a reputation. And when I was talking with Lydia, she really stressed how fabulous the people are in Norwood. And that really resonated and has continued to be the case as I've met and had opportunities to talk with more people there. I came and I talked to Lydia, and then we've been engaged in this process, and I've been learning more and more about the community of Norwood. The opportunity to be a director is exciting. That's something that I've looked forward to for a long time. And Norwood is really exciting and changing community. I know that there is a great history. There's a reason that people who grew up in Norwood seldom leave, which is not something you can say about a lot of communities around the Commonwealth. A lot of people will grow up, but then they'll go into Boston, or they'll go to school and they'll move away. But I've met several people who are very proud of their Norwood roots and continue to live in Norwood, and that's great to hear. I love that kind of community. My personal roots go back in Denver. My son is the 4th generation born in Denver. And they say you can't return to where to the city you grew up in, and that's true in Denver. But I have found a new home here in Massachusetts, and I understand that connection to place, and it's something that I really respect and admire about Norwood. I also know there's some changes happening in Norwood. It's the end of the commuter rail line. I used to get on the Norwood train every morning and evening I guess I was I was boarding it. I didn't think about it as a Norwood line as much as when I was in Copley Square catching it home. And I would always get on the Norwood train to go home and just get off just after Forest Hills and Rosendale. But it is changing. And I know that looking at the demographics, there's a whole wave of new families that are coming in from all corners of the globe. That's exciting. The mix of that potential that new energy can bring, and how the city is working to maintain its currency, I find super exciting. So the more I learn about Norwood, I knew that there were great people there. And the more I learn about how the city is organized, I learned about, the relationship with, it being a cable operator, which is kind of unique, I know. I've learned about some of its history of serving the community through various grants, and talking to people in the Commonwealth about initiatives that have really been ingrained in the culture in Norwood and in the library, which I find super exciting and would want to continue. I don't know, I could go on for a while about everything that I'm excited about Norwood, but I'm really pleased to be here and want to thank you all for your time this morning. And perhaps we can return to this question if you like, because I'm sure I could spend an entire hour talking about how I'm excited, but there's probably some more details we'd like to get into. So unless you'd like me to explore more right now, please let me know.
Well, you've answered our second question of are you excited? But no, I want to jump off though your discussion about what you've come to learn about Norwood and as a community, and yes. I want to understand how would you interact with the community? How would you become part of the community? Walking in, other than taking the train in. You're not from Norwood. You don't live in Norwood right now. How do you become part of that community, and then how do you build relationships to be successful as a library director?
Well, you nailed it right there at the end of the question with building relationships. I would do it the way that I've done it in every community. I'm not I do live in Boston now, but I've gotten to know a lot of people in Boston, built a community there. I don't live in Quincy, but I've built a community here. I would proceed the same way in Norwood. And it starts with conversations. It's especially hard in these COVID times, but in some ways there's a silver lining in that it's, we can immediately get to see each other. I would certainly be present on the ground. I know the library is open for browsing. I've been there a couple of times, and relationship building is all about building trust, about demonstrating that we care, about being present, and about conversation. So the way that I build community wherever I am is by talking to people, by identifying who the key players are. By joining, groups online like Norwood Now, and reading and finding out who the players are, and then engaging in conversations, figuring out ways that, I have the ability to help to explore opportunities for collaboration, really. And that can mean different things depending upon who I'm talking to. One thing that I'm doing here in Quincy right now is exploring how do we help people better understand what community resources are available here in COVID times. I think that's something we could do more of in Norwood as well. As there's a lot of people in every community that are working very hard to provide services in these times, and these services that we can provide are definitely affected by the pandemic and are different, and it can be a confusing landscape for people to navigate. So I would explore and engage. I've been engaging with conversations with people here and recording these conversations so that we could then publicize and share condensed visions of what's happening and put a human face on these services. I would endeavor to go about getting to know Norwood by putting a human face or by being the human face of the library and representing and talking, not just to promote library services, although I think that's something that's super important, but nobody wants to invite the person to the party that only wants to talk about themselves. I would come to listen, to engage, and explore ways that we can really work together, not in a competitive fashion, but in a way that can lift everybody and capitalize on our strengths.
So give us some examples of where you've done, of some ideas either that you might have to Norwood, or experiences you've had in your other positions that would reflect that collaboration.
So it's like, I know that, commerce is essential in every community. Reaching out to the business community and understanding, something that I've done here is, gone to breakfast for the Chamber of Commerce and develop relationships with the leadership there to understand, what's at play as we're looking at I know that there's some interest in potentially a cafe or some kind of increasing a diversity and more a greater diversity of service even that already exists at the library. That's going to take a relationship with the small business community and finding a specific small business owner, I would think, to actually make that relationship work. So by attending breakfast, by however the council is organized and talking to folks, maybe it's social events where they're organizing so people can know each other and just being present. That's something I've done before, where you go to the after work, the 5 o'clock cocktail hour, and you go and you mingle and you talk to people and you understand what their passions are, and you talk about the career resources. Or I would work with Mass Hire. I know that the city of Norwood, that Tony Mizuko is the also oversee the relationship, similar to what happens here. And so either myself or encouraging staff, because I can't do this all myself, but making space so that I can appropriately use the staff in the library as well, to be present if there are regular meetings, whether they're on Zoom or whatever, however they're happening, for the people that are participating in Mass Hire, to make sure that those resources are being shared and that we're doing a partnership there, but by being present and just knowing what resources are available. Other examples would be looking at the nonprofit community, looking at the people that are doing the trail building. There can be great program opportunities, which I'm sure Liz is already capitalizing on, but figuring out how do we just talk about the great resources that are right here, and we can do programs online, and before we can get people back out in partnership together and gather in person. So that's something that I've done, is just work on finding what are the programs that we can host, what are the connections we can make. It's by referring people too. What we do best in libraries is help connect people with resources. So when I think about who I know as resources, just like, we don't have to write the book on any of this. We didn't write the books on our shelves, but we know the authors, we know the publishers, we know how to make those connections work. So whenever I'm talking to somebody and I find out what you're interested in, my mind is always spinning about, all right, who else do I know that can help further your mission? Maybe it's not me, but maybe I know networks. And so that's something I've historically done, is just make those introductions. When the pandemic made it so that the annual August Moon Festival, which draws 20, 30,000 people to the South Shore here in Quincy, couldn't happen this year, I was talking with the people at Corey, the Quincy Asian Resources, Inc., and discussing ways we could do it. We talked about our virtual programming, and I helped to make a connection between the folks at Corey and the people at Quincy Access Television, and helped facilitate a number of meetings so that we could do a virtual event. And then we ended up hosting it and putting it, it ran live on QATV. It was hosted on the library's Facebook page, on our YouTube page, on Corey's Facebook page. It's on YouTube, and I helped make it so that it could still continue to reach out. And they did the work to reach out to lots of community partners. They actually have a brochure that they put together that happens to be sitting here on my desk. It was a physical piece that they sent out to everybody, and there was a nice library page inside, just giving credit to us, but it's alongside everybody else. It's recognizing when there's these important community gatherings, and being present at the library when it makes sense to do so, just to talk about what library services are there. Whether that's at at a 4th of July parade or a Pride event in June, or if it's I'm not sure what. I know that Norwood Day has historically been a big thing in Norwood, but I'm sure there's other traditions that I don't know about, and other organizations that are interested in starting new traditions. So how do we help facilitate those? How do we do it in a fair way that is taking the energy that's present in Norwood and helping expand on what people are passionate about?
Okay.
I can give more examples if you like, but perhaps you.
You mentioned engaging the staff because you can't be everywhere. I want to understand your management style. What's that look like? And again, with some examples of the manner in which, or an example of how you use staff, or how you manage staff.
Well, I think the first step in staff is getting excellent people, and Charlotte and the team there have done a great job of that. And when you have excellent people, the best thing to do is to trust them, to empower them, to give them support, to find out ways to give constructive feedback. I believe in leading with a lot of praise. I think it's very important for people to feel, especially in this time when things can be really crushing, that the work that we're doing is important, that it's serving a purpose. Management needs to express and have that higher elevation view so that we know, why are we doing the work that we're doing, and how do we translate that so that everybody in our organization knows that they're playing a personal role in our success. And how do we keep setting sights so that we're pushing ourselves, so that it's achievable, that we're kind, that we can recognize failure when it happens and pull back, because if we don't recognize failure, it's going to happen anyway. We're just going to try to cover it up, which isn't healthy. When we recognize failure, we have to do it in a way that is, that's not pointing fingers or looking for blame. It's figuring out how we can be on a path of continual improvement. So I believe in setting aggressive goals, and measuring progress towards those goals. In management, I think what's important when you do that goal setting is the communication and the follow through. So if you set goals but never revisit or look at them except for once a year or once every 3 years or something, when you have to go about this process, that just doesn't work. Similar, if you're waiting to do an annual evaluation to bring up all the issues you've got with somebody's performance, that's not healthy either. Everybody, as soon as you get that somebody tries to hit you with something that you didn't do well 4 months ago, you're going to get defensive, and it's not going to give you a lot. You've had 4 months already to do further errors. So you're further feeling the pit. So I don't want to put that on anybody. As a manager, I want to encourage people to talk to people in the moment, or privately. Obviously, if we're on the front line, you take it off into the back room when there's an appropriate time to do it, but to address issues in a kind way, but in a way that is responsible. And if we foster a culture that says of kindness and responsibility, I think that brings out the best in everybody. It's really all about regular communication. It's about taking those opportunities in the moment and also scheduling regular times so we can get together. So something we've done here in Quincy is we have department head meetings every 2 weeks, and then Megan and I meet one-on-one with each department head on the off weeks, and we have a schedule. So we cycle through. So, every, 9 weeks or, 18 weeks, it cycles, you come around. So it's, every other week we're meeting together, and on the off weeks, we're meeting one-on-one with folks, because that way we can make sure that we can have time to dive into whatever particular areas people need to explore. And we've got our notes and we've got our list of things that we're most concerned about, to express library priorities. One of the most important things I found as a supervisor that I can do, and one of the things that people have helped me do over time, is that prioritization. What's most urgent to attend and to attack right now? How do we look about, and we're looking at the bigger picture, what needs the attention right now? And how do we make sure that we're empowering everybody throughout the organization to help everybody who's reporting to them prioritize, so that we're spending our efforts accordingly. If we're ambitious, the way that I like to be, there's always going to be way more work than we're ever going to have hours to do. So it's all about prioritization and being kind so that we can focus our efforts most efficiently as possible.
So how do you prioritize?
How do I prioritize? I look at what's going to have the greatest impact. There's actually, I've got books that help provide some guides. It starts with knowing the strategic objectives, the priorities for the library. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to develop a strategic plan in Norwood and to look at what the community needs. So it starts with the previous conversation, those relationships with people, asking people to help you identify what does the library do best, what are the real opportunities for us to grow, what are other people in the community perhaps doing that they can do better than we can, or that we don't need to be competing with them, we need to figure out how to work collaboratively. So it's having that grand perspective, and then looking within each piece, having goals, and then having specific objectives, and being very intentional in your planning process, so that you've got priorities, you've got objectives, and then you've got specific measurable goals to meet those objectives, and you're checking in on those measurable goals, and that you're sharing that. The priority is this helping us meet our desired goals or not? Are we being responsive to the community? Because it all has to roll back to, are we giving Norwood what Norwood needs, what Norwood wants? If we're not, then we're going off in some other tangent, which could be intellectually fascinating, could be a lot of fun, could be really rewarding for a couple of people, but we have greater responsibilities when we're in management. And we have to avoid that getting distracted by something that feels really good for two people. And that's one of the hardest parts of management, honestly, is when you recognize that you have a program that's working great, but it's not scalable. It's not the wisest use of our resources because it can't reach enough people. And figuring out how do we look at the greater good? It's all about how can we make the biggest impact that we can.
Okay. You mentioned too, you again, going back to your discussion of the changing nature of Norwood, and the vibrancy. I think you used the term vibrancy.
If I didn't, I certainly agree with it. No.
All right. We were talking about the diversity of of Norwood. How would you ensure that the library remains inclusive, accepting, and welcoming? What programs, what initiatives, what actions would you take to make sure that that's the case?
Well, I certainly wouldn't pretend that I could do it by myself. As a white guy, there's a lot of listening that I always have to do to pay attention to all the members of the communities that I'm part of. So I would do it in partnership with a key group of people. I would, and I don't know, I haven't heard, but one of these may already exist, look at having a something that we've done here in Quincy and at the Crane, an accessibility and inclusion committee, so that we have a group of people with different perspectives looking at what are the barriers to access the library is doing, and being very intentional about thinking about different groups, and whether we're talking about diversity of physical needs, or we're talking about language, or we're talking about English needs, or we're talking about cultural experiences with libraries and with educational institutions, with government. We need to have representation from people who can understand these different identities. And so in partnership with folks, I would seek out those barriers and address them where they exist. Again, prioritize which are the easiest ones to address. There's going to be systemic things that that are going to be harder to crack, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I would look for examples from other communities that have gone down this road at being as inclusive as they can. I would draw on past experience in diverse communities. And I would do it with as many people as I could interest in engaging in the conversation. I would, encourage people to engage in community conversations and communications across the Commonwealth that I've been engaged with and helped lead, and across the country. We are at a time when there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out, how do we make sure everybody's got a place at the table? We have amazing resources. We need to figure out how to share them. And that's what libraries do best, is help facilitate sharing. That's one of the reasons I'm here.
Okay. All right. Quincy,
I can expand more if there's more that you're looking for sure.
No, well, I just want to, let me ask you about the committee. That's an interesting idea. Who sits on that committee in Quincy?
On our committee here, it's led by one of our adult service librarians. We have a team of folks, so I would certainly include those. It's got representation from our branches. It's got representation from the front line. Let's see, Eileen is the head of that. We've had a couple other people cycle through. I find it's always tricky figuring out the right composition. Finding people that are able to meet, so that if you have too large a committee, it's impossible to ever get together. So it's figuring out the right dynamics there. I don't want to have people that are token representation, but I do like to have underrepresented voices represented as well. We're actually doing a similar initiative around safety in our library, and I've formed a safety committee. I can speak less about the composition of the accessibility and inclusion committee. I've seen reports and I've talked with Eileen about those, but I'm personally leading the safety committee. And on that, we've chosen, and I think that there's definitely some intersection, especially as we're looking at the impact of, or the intersection of race, especially in some class issues, with the social justice system and the criminal justice system. When we think about how we're imposing our rules and looking at matters of societal, of justice, it's important to be aware. And so we've composed the safety committee of not a whole bunch of management. We, as management, as I described, meet on a regular basis, and hopefully we're infusing these values of accessibility and inclusion everywhere. And that's very important when I'm hiring a team, that I make sure I get people that are dedicated to that. So I'm really interested in how our day-to-day actions are interpreted. I'm not interested in throwing stickers or proclamations about saying our best intentions. I'm not interested in how do we act. What is it we're actually doing to make sure that people are welcome and that we are addressing these barriers when they exist. So composing a committee of people that are working on the front line. I really believe in listening to every level of the organization because it's those people that are working, at the reference desk, working at the front line of circulation, working in the children's department, and meeting the families as they come in every day, or online and as they're engaging in this COVID era. Having voices and getting the right mix of people from that front line, that is how the public intersects and experiences the library, is how we're going to, both understand really what we're doing, and make sure that there's institutional buy-in for any of the changes that we propose.
If I could just drill down into that a little bit, because it's a topic that I had to deal with myself at one point in time. Where some of the frontline people were more you want to make sure that it's a safe environment, but it's safe, but simultaneously inclusive and welcoming, because there can be the problem of under the term safety, that you would sort of prohibit certain, or you'd be less welcoming. How do you deal with that?
I actually don't think that being less welcoming increases safety that greatly. Real safety, like, you may think in the moment that it does, but I think, we're living in community. We're living alongside people, and the greatest safety comes from trust. It actually, I can speak to how police have done it, and I know community police officers who can talk about their response and what's proven to work on the front line, is developing relationships with everybody that you can, being friendly, being as welcoming as you can, so that when you need to hold somebody accountable, they know it's not personal. It's nothing about, them as a person. It's about some specific actions that really, when they stop and think about it, they know themselves are not acceptable and are inappropriate. They need to be called on. And when they've cooled down, they can come back and agree, yeah, I understand why you had to call me on this. I've had to do this. I've developed lots of relationships with folks. I can think about when I was a teen librarian, I had a young man who liked to hang out in the teen room, who was into ultimate fighting, like not the sanctioned kind, but the back of that, the back alley, some scary stuff. And he would dress in colors, and had gang affiliations, and was a member of the community, and like everybody was welcome, but he had some rough edges. And had to figure out, all right, how do we coexist? I mean, he had a right to come in, had a right to be there. He was a very charismatic young man. He was also older than a teenager. He was, slightly past, and liked to hang out with the younger women, the young women in the teen room. And one day he came in, and he was, could be scary looking if you looked at him a certain way. And he came in, was clearly, his eyes were bloodshot. He was super high, and was trying to hang out in the teen room I was supervising. It wasn't a matter of, coming down hard on him, but I had to hold him accountable. He couldn't be there. I didn't have anybody else I could call on. So what did I do? I had a conversation and told him he had to leave. And he wasn't happy about it, but he did leave. And I was able to resolve it. Dealing with frontline staff, I take a similar approach. It's about de-escalating. It's about knowing our community as best we can, so we have their trust and respect. And then by developing that relationship and by being that welcoming place, when someone steps out, we've got support from other people who know us, and we can even get the support of the person that we need to hold accountable once the moment cools down. And our main job is to be welcoming, and when something starts to flare, how do we redirect it? How do we say, I'm sorry, if you continue acting this way, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. And then if they still refuse to leave, figuring out some way to, honestly, you may have to pacify and appear that you're stepping down, but then you turn and you go into the back room and you call the police, and they come and enforce your request. Not complying with a staff request isn't appropriate. And I'm not asking staff to put up with bullying, but there's ways that we can do it safely. We can calm people down, and if people refuse to leave when we want them to, we can get professionals to come and remove people from our building. And I talk about doing that regularly with folks. Okay. It develops, it also demands a relationship with the police if you're going to have that. And that can be scary to a lot of folks. How do you have, and maybe I've had environments where the police were not always the reliable actor. So maybe it's a different community worker that you can call on. Maybe it's a street worker that comes in. Maybe it's somebody who is a peer counselor. recognizing when you have an issue with somebody that's not a criminal justice matter, but a mental health issue. And we've had many of those that I can tell stories about, where, you know, it's not going to serve anybody to send somebody into the court system to kind of spin the wheels through that machine. What really needs to be done is to bring in and have some kind of intervention with somebody who can help them get the medical help that they need to start treating the addiction that's been dogging them, or to just find a safe place to sleep so they can get some rest and come at it with a clear head, or maybe get somebody to help them address the voices that are talking to them in their head. And yes, there may have been some threats, or there could have been some other extenuating circumstances that mean that because of their behavior, we need to exclude them for a bit, but we can still do it in a way that helps them get what they need and helps us keep a safe environment.
I guess my question, just so I'm clear, my question was, how do you make staff?
How do you make staff?
How do you make
So,
staff?
Yep.
That culture.
Thank you for circling around. So you do it with staff, I think, by sharing, you know, it's all about communication. So staff need to tell you when incidents are happening so you can back them up, by having trainings. So having a de-escalation training so that people are equipped with the skills, even providing some staff really like to have a script so they know what to say. And you can even, people don't like role playing, I've generally found, but I think I've been in several trainings where they've talked about the value of role play and of improvisation. There's some folks who will say, you know, help you go down, how do you get people just to do the improv? A lot of this job of public service is improv. And the classic rule of improv is always say yes and. So how do we take whatever energy is being presented and accept it, but redirect it in a way that we want to see it going? And that constant, and it develops skills at doing that. So it's by, you know, making sure the staff knows that you trust them, that you're listening to them, that you know that things are hard. We have to recognize there's some really hard times that everybody's going through, encouraging people to take space. You know, we can all have a situation arise where, you know, we just need to step back. And so for making sure that we've got staff in place to, yeah, and it could be me, it could be other folks who can step forward and say, all right, I've got this for a moment. Why don't you go into the back and just take 5? And then we can debrief. Having those debrief opportunities, making sure that you create those debrief opportunities with staff so you can look at what they've done and how they could do it better. And doing it in partnership with other folks, because the way that I may communicate something may not be the best way for you to hear it. So if I have a team of people that I'm working with, we have a common idea of what making a welcoming environment looks like and how we can do this. If we can, you know, figure out the right relationships with folks, with staff, so that the right person can be delivering the message. It could be that Lydia has a unique relationship with someone, and they're going to listen to her provide the feedback in a way that they wouldn't be able to hear it from me. I don't have any, you know, I want to see the behavior change. I want to make sure that we're providing the best environment possible. I am not going to be, offended if, you know, in partnership, Lydia is the best person to talk to that person. Lydia and I would obviously be talking to each other very regularly, and figuring out the most strategic way to go about any specific issue that comes up. It's always about context, really, and helping staff have the tools to address the different things that come out them.
Okay, John.
Clayton, I'm going to make a request here, and I don't mean it to sound confrontational, although it just might.
Okay.
I have an advanced degree from Wharton, and I'm familiar with management speak and training speak and such. And I am welcoming the idea of taking the base of library, of what libraries are and what librarians do, and seeing how you can do those things better by layering in concepts from that world. What I'm struggling with right now is that I don't hear the librarian base in what you're saying. I don't hear library specific examples or librarian specific examples. I hear the general concepts of management floating above it all, communication and what have you. And that's making it hard for me to get a really good sense of what you've done and what you would imagine doing in a greater degree of specificity that sounds like a librarian. I hope I've made myself clear. I won't be surprised if I haven't.
I certainly welcome the challenge. Thank you, John. and we'll try to see how I can ground this more in a sense of libraries. I think that when I was talking about connecting people with resources, that's when I put on really the library hat, and helping. It's the tradition of library science is that it's every book its reader, every reader their book, and finding the right resource for the right person at the right time. That's the kind of core of how do we keep things structured and organized in a fashion so that we can make those connections. The communication element, I think, is crucial and has always been crucial to libraries. And as you've pointed out, I can talk at length about it. But to ground it in library reality, we're talking about what can we do with programs? What can we do with the day-to-day interactions? How can we structure things in an equitable fashion so that no sole individual can, if we want to talk about actual library practice, how do we make sure that we don't have policies that are, providing undue favors for some at the expense of others? How do we look at the most underserved in our communities and making sure that we're representing them, people in our collections, and making our resources available to the people who can best use them?
Well, let me jump in, because let's build on this.
Yeah, please.
Talk to us about your, in very direct way, your vision of what a library is in a community and what the trends are in library science that you feel are really indicative of where libraries are going.
So, I think that's a good question. And it's different in every community. We had a similar conversation about this a couple of weeks ago when we met in a smaller circle, because I think the trends that are most, it's not a cookie cutter approach. There's not one idea of a ideal library that's going to fit every community. But so the trends that I really find most attractive in libraries are things like what PLA is doing with Project Outcome, that I've been part of speaking about on national webinars and national conferences, at local and regional events. I'm looking at outcome-based assessment. So this is, again, how do we understand the good that we're doing? And how do we make it so it's not just about output and the number of people through our doors and the number of items that we circulate, but it's about what impact is that having on our community? That's a trend that I think is super exciting in libraries, and is being pushed by PLA. Bringing people together around the interest that they hold dear. That's something that has been rooted in public libraries for a long time. And I think we're getting even better and better at it. There was an article in American Libraries, not this most recent one, but the one before, I believe, that was about a program that was kind of started by Luke, the teen librarian in Waltham, and has been something that I've supported and been encouraging our teen librarian here in Quincy to undertake. All about, it's called Real Talk, and it's about bringing teens together to talk about the issues that are most important to teens. So there's an actual library example of the intersection of hearing what teens want and developing programming for what they want. The same thing with adults. So it's looking at the impact, and it's being responsive. It's that whole idea of responsive design that we're seeing in the greater world as well. I know the libraries of things has been something that's been very exciting, and I'm interested in exploring what are the right things to add. I see in Norwood that there's a pretty awesome library of things. This is all the sewing needles that people can borrow, that you get a special project, and knowing that you can come to the library to get the tools for that project, whether it's a tool library. I think those are really exciting to develop. The instrument libraries, I know there's several instruments in Norwood's library for people that are interested in exploring that. Libraries are a great place for people to start exploring, especially public libraries, what's that initial interest? So how do we have materials, whether they're books or movies or physical objects, to let people explore whether that's something they want to further, to do more of. So maybe they want to practice guitar for a few weeks before, they invest in some lessons or something. And we have a guitar so they can do that. We've got somebody who knows how to help them tune the guitar. That could be me. I'm sure we have other staff that could do that as well. So I'm really excited about that. There are some longstanding traditions in libraries that we also have to keep holding on to and hold dear. People think first and foremost about libraries, about borrowing. It's not new, but we need to make sure that there are materials that are available. Looking at the trends in publishing and electronic publishing, staying on top of how that develops and making sure that we've got the best relationship with our vendors so that we can be giving people the material that they want in the form that they want it. I know Liz has been leading for the Minuteman Network for electronic collection development, which I'm really excited. I'm really glad that she's been doing. I'm really glad that Charlotte was able to hold on to her, because I think that's a really important forefront as we look at different ways that people can access electronic content, and how do we de-siloize it? How do we take information that we have all these vendors that are trying to sell us stuff, and instead of promoting something as a Libby product or an Overdrive product or a Hoopla or a Canopy, we say, you want to read something? We've got stuff you can read. You want to listen to an audiobook? We've got that too. And how do we create that experience? And so we get all these vendors and all the noise out of the way and just make it as efficient as possible to get people to what they want. That's a really exciting trend. And I've seen some major libraries take it. And I think that here in Massachusetts, for political realities, we have to do it in partnership with others. So it's, how do we do it in Minuteman? How do we do it in cooperation with the different library networks so that we can take advantage of cooperative purchases, and how do we have cooperative arrangements so that we can most efficiently share them as widely as possible. We could go down that quite a bit and talk about what a Hoopla is doing with publishing and how their, Midwest Tape is trying to edge into the ebook market. But why that, and I've been in conversation with people in higher levels of Midwest Tape about that, who are interested in what we're doing in our perspective and keep trying to get me to buy in. But I don't think it's wise when we look at the cooperative arrangements with Overdrive and resource sharing across all the networks, and how that is leveraging so many awesome resources across the Commonwealth for everybody. Why would we want to start going in a different direction if that would, put barriers or even perceived barriers between our people, our community, and the greatest amount of resources they have available? It's complicated, but those are some of the trends.
Yeah, okay. No, and that I'm going to use that as to segue into another area, and that is your financial management skills. What is your specific involvement in the development of the Crane annual budget, capital budget? And I noted here that you administered the grant program for Boston, in particular the E-rate program. Talk to us about your financial management skills.
Sure. I've been treasurer for multiple nonprofits. I've been part of fundraising teams. As a staff administrator, staff assistant at Harvard, I helped a professor manage many federal grants. We talked about that before. Right now, my involvement really lies in goal setting and monitoring for the materials expenditures. That's something that the assistant, we had some before, but defining more precise goals and doing that in a patron driven manner using a tool called Collection HQ, which is using evidence-based purchasing, looking at actual performance metrics to guide how material dollars should be spent. So my specific involvement starts at a high level, looking at all the dollars that we have and understanding when we're talking about materials expenditures. Specifically, what should be, what's the right divide between electronic resources, be those databases or other kind of database-like electronic resources. How much are we spending on licenses for, the traditional kind of license model with Overdrive. In our case, what are we spending per month, and setting budgets and monitoring those for ones that are pay-per-use models like Hoopla and Canopy. And then what's the right division between that and how many people are taking advantage of those resources, and looking at it as a relationship to that with our physical resources, and specifically, starting at a high level, how do we break it between the teen, the children's and the adult budgets? How do we look at specifically within each of those, the way that we've been following a Collection HQ model here, which is looking at non-book, which is your DVDs and your CDs primarily, your fiction, your nonfiction, and then looking with each of those into different categories and monitoring spending. Yep. That's something I've done for a long, long time.
All right, Donna.
Would you like to?
Yeah, Donna.
Every month when we have our meeting, Charlotte gives us a number of spreadsheets. And I'm curious as to, can you handle that? Can you present the budget to town meeting? What do you know about the grants and funds that we have?
Sure. I'm certainly familiar with spreadsheets and with presenting those and pulling those together. I've done those. I don't have direct responsibility for those here, but I have represented them in nonprofits that I've worked in and in other positions. So I'm very adept at figuring out how to classify expenses so that we can, this is in some ways it's information architecture. Again, I put on the librarian brain. How do we, group like with like to present the story so it's digestible? And how do we look at, if it's a profit and loss statement that you're creating, are we looking at cash flow? There's many different ways to approach this. And so I would want to understand how Charlotte's done it. And I have no concerns about my ability to come in and use spreadsheets that have already been developed. I use spreadsheets all the time. I, in fact, I get a weekly update about like different tips so I can continually expand my spreadsheet knowledge. And everybody here in the library and in many organizations that I've worked with have looked to me if they're having spreadsheet challenges. So I'm not concerned about that.
How about the annual budget though? How comfortable will you be advocating for developing the annual budget, advocating for it and presenting it to the relevant bodies?
I would be very comfortable. I would, make the case. I would, look at what the funding reality is at the time. Understand that, what is the biggest piece of our budget is going to be staff. I would imagine, I haven't seen the budget in Norwood, but that's across the board, and understanding how it's divided among the different staff. There's a large number of part-time staff, so managing that and looking at our expenditures whenever we have a staff opening that, creates opportunities. But simplifying that, understanding, if there's a time that there's a hiring freeze, looking at the other city agencies and being understanding of, the community pressures, but also advocating for what the library needs. So I would present the case for what the library needs while understanding that there's other community pressures and really working to be a team player across the town, so that we're not asking for something that's unfair. We're just asking for what we need.
Marguerite?
Yeah. Clayton, I see in one of your references said that when you were in Boston, that you managed a $2 to $3 million budget. Now that's different than what you do in public libraries. But was that $2 to $3 million budget? Did you deal with collections, or what did that budget entail?
David would have been talking about the E-rate budget and how that was shared, I assume, or he would have been talking about the digital literacy part. I'm not sure exactly which one he would have been referring to, or kind of bigger. I have, certainly been involved in collections in IT expenses and looking at both capital expenses for longer term. Some of the budget I'm sure he was talking about was of that capital nature. So you're looking at infrastructure expenses, switches primarily, but several other pieces of longer term, wiring and things that are just part of our buildings, versus the consumables, the front, the keyboards and mice, everything down to that level, to your server connections, and then looking at core pieces. It could be software as a service, and understanding what are development costs for that, what are going to be initial costs, what are going to be annual maintenance, what are so that could have been what he was referring to as well. I certainly was managing and oversaw the replacement, the transition from one ILS system to another. I oversaw that, and there were a lot of budgetary components of that as we were looking at just understanding the different expenses, the total expense of different, the cost of ownership for different solutions, and how those fit into a bigger.
Also, I just wanted to clarify one thing that came up when we were meeting. You had said that you did the ARIS report for Quincy. Now, the ARIS, some of the information from the ARIS report goes into the state aid report. You didn't actually work on the state aid, but the information that you gave from the ARIS report was used in the state aid. Is that correct?
That's accurate.
Okay, thank you. Because a great deal of that information from ARIS is necessary for state aid.
It's essential. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's a lot. I mean, talk about spreadsheets. It's spreadsheets on trials with spreadsheets with multiple tabs, and especially if you want to look at with any kind of historical context, which I think is the only way to look at that. If you look at it just at what you're doing 1 year, you need to be able to look, all right, how does this compare to the last 3 years, to look at trends. That's the most
Yeah.
meaningful when we're
Well, yes, when I look at both, when I look at the state aid form, I see that ARIS, boom, right into state aid. So I understand how it works. So you need one. The ARIS is the big collection, and the state aid is the
heavy lifting.
formal drop-in from ARIS. So, okay, thank you for telling me those two things.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking for clarification.
A couple of a few more questions that I have, if everybody else jump in. But what do you see as your greatest weakness, and how do you work to address that?
One of my greatest weaknesses has been, I think I talk very quickly, and I like to say yes quickly, and trying to figure out. I think that's a strength and a weakness, but I think that it's important to take time and gather information from multiple sources, and to make sure that everybody at the table has an opportunity to speak. And it's something I've been working at for a long time, to make sure I take that time and do that listening, and then can give a positive response. But maybe it comes from years of doing customer service and that front line and that improv we were talking about yesterday, where it's yes and. How do I stay positive? But I think especially as we move in management, when you're doing a job search like you are all doing, you have to say no to a lot more people than you get to say yes to. And so it's, how do you say no when it's the appropriate thing to say, and how do we redirect? So I've been working on it for a long time, and I think I'm actually pretty good at listening now, but it's something that, my wife will tell me it's always important to keep listening.
Okay. What's your greatest strength?
I think my greatest strength is my connections with people. It's relationships. I derive my strength, and I believe I give the greatest strength by just my passion for individuals, and my ability to make connections with lots of different types of people from lots of different walks of life. I really don't want to judge, and I really try, even sometimes if there's a voice inside of our head telling us something about somebody because of our past history, I really want to bring every person and respect you for who you are and what you're presenting to me today, and what you choose to share, and how do we personally make a relationship to move forward. And I think being able to draw upon a lot of strong relationships is what's brought me to be here today. It's just a lot of great people. And so it's my greatest strength is our community's greatest strength, and that's our ability to work together.
Right. I think we've touched upon your technology background, so I don't know if we need to go into that in any more detail, but I am interested in your facility management experience, particularly as it relates to, you had the opportunity, you said, to visit the library. Actually, I think you said that you've been there a few times, but that there's space issues there that are going to need to be addressed. Can you give us your specific experience with addressing library space issues?
Sure. I've been involved in everything from, just thinking about how do we, how can we move things around and move collections to better serve folks and better take advantage of space, and doing that internally, to working with actually the same people who did the redesign project in Norwood, CBT, and working on, kind of program definition processes, and working with architects to best understand, all right, on a big scale, what are the opportunities, and how do we do a bigger analysis where we're really looking at specific parts of collections. When we talk about space, it's really, how do we look at how our collections can serve best, and can serve our public and serve our space as best as they can. And often, not often, but there are times when bringing in a professional who can really think spatially and present a few options is the best way to go. And I've been involved in those conversations with architectural teams. So, whether it's using stack map to help people understand space and just navigate the space we have, which I don't believe Norwood uses, but stack map is an add-on that I helped to bring here that plugs in, requires that the person who implements it, in our case, is our head of our tech services team, go through and basically you just have to make sure that everything's lined up so it only has one location on the shelf, which sounds simple enough, but you realize that we always have data cleanup to do. So it's a great exercise for the person who would come into this position to really understand the collection and then make sure everything lined up. And then it's an add-on to the public browser for the catalog, so that any visitor can, on their own, find an item in the catalog. It says a little map it, and they can click there and see where it is. So it's a tool that we can use both to help us organize and make sure that we're representing our collection to everybody to make it as findable as possible. But then we can also flip that and say, all right, how can we, how do we look at usage? How do we combine that with tools like Collection HQ and, kind of turnover rates? So we can say, maybe we had this great idea of putting the mystery like we did here. Let's put it in the back, because we know we have a kind of an underused corner of the library where it gets a little scary. We have people who've been congregating, and we have a lot of dedicated mystery readers. So let's put this mystery collection back there, so it'll draw some traffic back there, and we can address some of the negative behavior because it's been a neglected space. Not neglected, but you know what I'm saying. It's been underutilized. And then you can look at the data and say, all right, did circulation tank when we moved into the back because people are afraid or they didn't want to walk that far? So I've got experience doing that kind of space planning as well. A great example of some space planning, a project that I helped lead here, was we had a back office that was used as an off-desk space for our adult services staff. It's where they could hang their coats, where they could use a computer when they're off desk. But it was really, most of the time they were out on the floor. And we had a literacy department that had a smaller space with no windows, but they were seeing tons of people through all the time. And what we did is we swapped the two and we moved the literacy. We worked and went out to bid and got a glass partition put in place so that they could have offices where they could have a little bit of soundproofing, but they were able to use as a classroom, a big table in the center of that room that had been the reference office, turn a couple of nooks into spots where tutors could work or people could do individual solo work on computers. They could have their office space, but be very accessible and have this gorgeous light streaming in, which really showed the importance. And they were working there, we had 2 people working there 70 hours a week between the 2 of them. And had lots of other people. They had, all the student tutor pairs and all the classes to show that this is an important value. How we use our space speaks to our values, to give them that space. And then to figure out how to best support the adult reference staff in that smaller space that had been the literacy office. So they didn't feel like they were getting, shafted, but, making sure that they got their own phones and we figured out how do we, add some personal touches so they still feel welcome, but they understand that it's for them, they're not there nearly as much as the people that are literacy office. That's an example of space planning that I helped to do in a team that I'm really proud of, because it's just great to be able to bring people in and show them that.
Donna?
When you're talking about this, you've been talking about space, but I'm concerned too about the management, the facility management. In this time of COVID, unfortunately, there's a lot of maintenance needs to be done in a library, and there's maintenance at other times. We recently put in a new air conditioner. So although we have a facilities, what do they call that? It's a new group. You have to be aware of that as director of each thing that you need.
I'm sorry, I didn't. So how do I, where is that?
Yeah. How did you address COVID at your place? What are you going to do? And I'm talking about the actual hands-on stuff.
Sure. Well, the actual so I can talk about how we've addressed COVID here, and how, the conversations, it comes back to the communication, and I can talk in general about the importance of communication, but actually how we're addressing COVID. Here it was first about procuring plexiglass so we could have screens in place, so we could understand. It was looking at the science and understanding how long to physically quarantine things, and the best ways to use our space, turn the meeting room, especially at the beginning when we had longer quarantine periods before we better understood the science. We were taking space and having things, separated from folks for that quarantine period. It's about working with the HVAC team and making sure that we can give that we have a system that is doing maximum airflow, and that's something we've done here is work closely with in the city of Quincy. We have in the buildings department, there's a dedicated HVAC person, and making sure that there was he's got a lot of priorities across the city, but making sure that, advocating for the library to make sure that we get their attention and that we're getting the attention that we need, working with the health department in conjunction with the HVAC, because there's elements there, and making sure that we have the right, amount of airflow. And then it's advocating to make sure we're looking at longer term capital projects, being aware of what they are, making sure that in a busy, building department or planning department, whatever the responsible entity is in the community, that there's a regular check-in, because often the squeaky wheel is going to get the grease, as they say, and making sure that we can be appropriate, provide that appropriate amount of volume while understanding and building a relationship, so that they don't see us as just that annoying library, but they understand the value, which I'm sure they do, and they're reminded if something has been sitting too long. So it's having the system in place so that we don't become house blind. Having a cycle so that when, over the summer, maybe the painters are dedicated to, freshening up schools. This is not as COVID related, this is more longer term, but then, we get them at other times so that, when school's back in session, perhaps in the mornings or evenings, we can make sure we're on a regular painting cycle, working on disinfecting surfaces, something that we did. I actually got examples sitting right here on my desk of a check log for our facilities crew that is going through, and we've got these specific for different locations in the library, and it's got different, it's got AM, noon, and PM, so 3 shifts a day where they have to go through and disinfect each of these and initial that they've disinfected those surfaces. So we're sending them through to make sure that, and this is really just to demonstrate to kind of help them communicate to everybody the surfaces that they are disinfecting, so everybody knows that we have the cleanest possible environment we could do. Having on facilities, having regular masks, so that everybody who comes in, if somebody comes in without a mask, we've got a disposable mask that we're going to hand them if we have guests, so we're keeping people safe that way. It's not as much facilities, but related. Bernie, it looked like you were trying to get a word in there. Would you like me to stop? And
well, John, do you feel your question was answered?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. We're up against the clock here a little bit, so I
totally understand. Thank you.
Drill into a couple more things before we go. Can you tell us about a mistake that you made on the job within the past few years and how you handled it?
Sure. A good example of a mistake I made. I can remember doing some website work. We had a website that we were doing a newsletter on a website, and we had a monthly newsletter. I was writing the newsletter and was composing away. I'd been working on it for a couple hours, and then navigated away from the page, or had to do something, refresh the page, and all of a sudden lost all the work that I did. And it was really frustrating, of course, as anybody who's lost work is like, oh, geez, what are we going to do? And so we've actually changed systems even since that mistake and made things even easier. But at that point, I pivoted immediately to doing things, to doing my website composition in Google Docs, so that I had a online, web word processor that would just automatically save. So if something crashed, I didn't lose all the work that I did. We've since made further improvements so that we can be parceled and try to recycle things between pieces. I don't need to go into the weeds there too much, but yeah, that's one example of how I said, I felt the pain, picked myself back up. At least I'd done the intellectual work, so I just had to pour it out again. But I've taken every step that I can not to lose my work again, because it's not pleasant. I'm sure it's happened to everybody here.
Can you tell us about a decision you made or accomplishment that you've had that makes you most proud?
What's a good example of that? Honestly, I think our head of IT, I'll give her a shout. We had an opportunity to hire. We had a person leave and went through a search process to bring in a new head of IT. In crafting that job description and go through that, we found our current head of information technology, and she is superb. So it was awesome to get to meet her, to talk to people through that process, but to bring her on board and then have the benefit of her contributions every day and be able to tell her what an awesome contribution she is and member of our community, to be able to say that here in this public forum. I think it's our relationships with people that are the greatest. So there's smaller examples, but the most long-term, I think, here institutionally and in any individual's life, I think that hiring decision, I'm super, super proud of, and the ongoing support so that you can continue to thrive. Okay. There's a lot of other people, but I'm just super proud of the folks who work for me. There were some awesome people. I'm
Great.
gonna miss them.
Okay, briefly, how would you describe what would you describe as the role of the library director, and how would you determine your success if you were made Norwood's library director?
So I see the library director as helping understand and communicate the vision and strategic direction of a library, and then executing that. And I would judge my performance by my ability to communicate that, and then to the library itself's accomplishments of that. So, making sure that we set the objectives to match what the community most needs, and then our ability as an institution to meet those needs. That's how I judge myself.
Okay, good. Trustee questions that have not been asked. Go ahead, Marguerite.
I just have one. I know that you sit in for the director when the director's not available. I would like to know what your work is with the board, how you interface with the board, how you communicate with them, and if you've had any untoward issues with the board.
With our board of trustees?
Yes.
So I attend every trustee meeting. So we have an official secretary, but I take all the minutes and then share them with the secretary, and then the secretary approves them and they're published. But I've been that person taking the minutes. I make an annual report to the trustees right now, but I'm also present and participate when they ask me questions, or if there's something that I can lend a hand. Obviously, in my current position, I defer to Megan, the director, who we have a board chair who runs the meetings, but there's always a director's report. If there's something supplemental, we communicate, and I talk with Megan ahead of time if there's anything we're presenting, to make sure that any policies that we're bringing to the board has, we've both thought through them, that we've gotten input on them from all the important people, whoever those folks are, depending upon the policy that are related. So there's all the work that goes in ahead of time. And I have a very good relationship with our trustees. We have some great trustees here in Quincy. One of them actually used to work here, so I have a professional past relationship with her. She went and then was a director at another library and lives in the community and is now a member of our trustees. I've actually brought one of our trustees, I brought to do a presentation at a Massachusetts Library Association conference about some work she's done. She actually started as a tutor in our literacy program, and had some really, just has some great stories to tell about her relationships with some of those students and about the value of those services. So I was able to bring and help her, kind of tell that story on a greater scale to try to inspire some other people to do similar work. I feel very grateful for the trustees that we have here, and look forward to developing relationships with you all.
Thank you.
Good, very good. Anybody else? All right, we have time for maybe one question if you have.
Okay, let me pull up my list of questions and see what is most important to me to ask at this point. Of course, I had them up and they've since disappeared as I was waiting and doing other work while I was waiting for this thing to start. Where did they go? Sorry for this delay. I had them all set and then I got involved in other work because we were delayed here, and as we're delaying other folks. Well, it's all right. I have notes and I have Charlotte's email, so I can follow up with them. Yep. I think I would actually love to understand, if I have only one question, what do you see, let me do this as what do you see as the most important skills that the new director for the Morrow Memorial Library will bring to this job? What do you hope to be demonstrated?
Okay, who wants to take that? John.
You won't be surprised to hear that that's the question that's top of the list for all the candidates. And the answer I give is every trustee probably has a different take on that. That's why we're stronger together. And we've talked about all your different skills and experience. So whatever priority and emphasis any trustee puts on one particular area, they'll have the information they need to be able to weigh that. More than that, I think I can't say without inadvertently preempting the authority and position of my fellow trustees. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to add anything? Okay. Well, I think we're all set, Clayton.
Bernie Sarah had her hand up. And
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't see it. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say that what I hope to see in our new director is someone who is a strong advocate, who can speak for the library and the community, who is able to work well with the other players in town, and just has a passion for our library community.
That's great to hear. That's certainly what I would want to do. So, thank you.
Marguerite, did you have something?
Sarah took the words out of my mouth, as usual. I think she lives inside me.
All right. Well, again, Clayton, thank you very much for being with us here today. And this was very helpful. And I think everyone enjoyed the opportunity to get to know you and understand what you're all about and how you would serve as the library director for Norwood. So the trustees will be making their decision next week, we think.
Great. Well,
Great.
I would just like to say
Thank you.
thank you. I'm sorry, Sarah.
I was just saying thank you for coming.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you for your work and your passion. I really am excited about this. I've been learning and loving what I've learned about Norwood. I've appreciated the thoughtful questions and the challenges today. And I'm really grateful for all your time and energy. And I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you so much. And if you do have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I know Bernie has my contact information. I'm very easy to find online. You can find lots of examples of me talking to people. And if you go and you put my name into YouTube, you'll see me all over the place. So
We
you to-
have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good
Thanks,
afternoon.
Clayton.
Bye-bye.